Good morning. This is the Blaine's World podcast, where conversations are worth hearing and seeing. You can watch us each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also listen in on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. And for more information on past episodes, you can visit the website, which is behind me, blainesworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, coming to you from my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. And each week, we share positive news and information that people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce um, a new friend of mine, Ann Moebes, for being my guest today. And Ann, you can feel free to wave to all your fans and friends on YouTube and elsewhere. And
Hello.
that is Ann Moebes. And people in the area may know her because she just finished a starring gig in Great Show Music Man, and that's how I first got to um, meet Ann. But we're going to talk, Ann, a little something different though, because in doing that show, I found out about you that had kind of an interesting other story to tell, if you will. And it's not so much about you, but it's about your dad, Jack Moebes. And why don't we jump right into that? So he was a very talented photographer, professional photographer. And what was his background?
Yeah, so it's interesting. He was a press photographer for the Greensboro News and Record for 30 years, from 1945 to 1975. And how he got into it was that he had actually gone to law school, but then he volunteered, for the war, World War II, and they sent him to they gave him an aptitude test, and they found that he tested high on photography, so they sent him to Lowry Force Base in Colorado Springs, where he trained as a photographer and to print, and so he was going to be in the photo mapping unit. And then he got shipped to various islands in the South Pacific, where he was for 3 years, and got malaria a couple of times. But interestingly, because he was colorblind, he got booted out of combat. So the aerial photographer, the in the Army Air Force, if you were a photographer, you had to also be able to land the plane. But because he was colorblind and you needed to see the lights, I guess, of the runway or something were, red and green or whatever, he got booted out of that. So he was basically in photo labs in the South Pacific. And then he just fell in love with photography. So when he came back, he didn't want to practice law, and he got a job with the News and Record. So
Now,
Greensboro.
before he moved into it, had he as a kid been a photographer or had he taken pictures?
No, I think there was a story about how somebody had given him a little
Right.
camera, and or something, but yeah, I don't know that he really knew he had a talent for it until he took that, aptitude test, but he was very naturally talented in photography. Yeah.
And something you
So,
said I find very interesting in that you also mentioned he was colorblind, and so am I. But let me ask you then, so most of his career he was doing black and white. Did he
that's
eventually
right.
discover color, or did he eventually take color pictures?
Even later after he retired, he did a little bit of color, but he just loved black and white. And he even when a lot of the press photographers, the quintessential press camera was the speed graphic.
Right.
So and it was a large format, 4x5 negatives. And he, even when the other photographers were going to 35 millimeter, he still stayed with the speed graphic because he just loved that he could get all that detail, in his images. So when he died, there were, some 20,000 negatives that I had inherited and didn't have a chance to go through actually completely until COVID, which was really amazing because I was extremely close to my father, and to kind of go through them was like going every day on a job with him, which could be anything from car wrecks to parades to, civil rights, protests to, I don't know, fires and, everything that a press photographer covers during 30 years.
You mentioned the dark room. did he eventually convert darkroom? Did he eventually ever develop color?
No, I don't think he ever developed color. But yeah, but I used to sit, as a little girl, I would come in and sit on a stool and it was just like magic watching him kind of move the print, from print to different hypo and whatever the different things were. And then to see that come alive under the enlarger and then, to me that was just magic. So
Just listening to it, it's magic to me. Did you ever learn how to do this yourself?
No, unfortunately. I mean, that's one of those things where you just regret that, I could have learned from the master. I mean, I did go to film school and I have, I think, that acumen for the audio visual, ta talent, but the technical part of it, I don't like so much. So, I like being able to tell a director of photography what I want and let them figure out how to do it. You know what I mean?
So
Yeah.
talk about the
But
fact.
but in years later, I've been kind of regretful that I didn't learn from him because he would have been the best teacher. Yeah.
So talk about the fact that all of a sudden then COVID hits, and you now find yourself. You had them for a long time, but you have yourself
Yeah.
with 20,000 pictures
20,000 negatives. Yeah.
negative.
4 by 5 negatives.
So
Yeah.
what did you do with them? What did you start doing?
So I had sort of stored them for all these years just because I was working so many hours. I was a lawyer, an entertainment lawyer, and mostly in LA. And so I just never had time to go through them. And so until, after I'd retired and I had moved to Asheville. And so the idea was that I had to preserve this collection because if I didn't start putting them in archival boxes and whatnot, that they were going to deteriorate. So I was able to do that and working on other conservation measures now too. And hopefully, eventually, we'll be doing more exhibits, some books I'm hoping to do in the near future. So that's the goal to conserve this really amazing collection of 20th century, photography.
Yeah.
So
That was certainly, though, a pretty big job for you to go to 20,000 negatives.
it is. It is.
Were any of them in print form or they were all negatives?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it's interesting because as a child, of course, we were always having our picture taken, and I mean, that's not on this website that I have now for him, but because it's mostly his work photos, but just every time I was turning around, our pictures were being taken, and they were always these beautiful artsy pictures in 8 by 10 glossies, instead of what most people have, which are little
Right.
Polaroids or something. And they're just wonderful artsy shots. Yeah.
I mentioned my dad did similar
Yeah.
kinds of thing he took for everybody else. Was your dad also like the neighborhood photographer? Did he take for other people, your friends and
Did take a
family?
lot of neighborhood kids too, and we were always in the newspaper, all of us. So if it was a snow day, he was taking pictures, because he would sometimes be asked to just tool around town and find, a snow shot
Right.
or, I have a quote on the website about how he would sometimes, whenever they wanted a shot, of snow or something, he'd go up on this skyscraper that had ice on it. And one story was that this insurance agent kind of put his head out the window because it was very precarious up there and said, wow, that's a hell of a way to make a living. And my father said, well, what do you do? And he said, I'm an insurance agent. And he said, well, I would sure hate to work as an insurance agent. But he would take those pictures of us and like Halloween, there'd always be a shot of me with, light of a pumpkin or some kind of crazy thing just to put it in the newspaper. So my picture is probably in the newspaper. God only knows how many times. Yeah.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
I had 3 older brothers, all of whom are deceased
Um,
now. Yeah, I don't have any family members left. Yeah, I lost the last brother
but they
last year.
were involved in the picture taking too. Uh,
Well, yeah, they were the subject too, and actually, my oldest brother who died this last September. He was a prodigy artist. He went to the art school in New York City, the famous Art Students League in New York. But he also did a lot. My father taught him a lot of photography. So my father kind of moonlighted as a wedding photographer because he didn't make enough at the newspaper
Right.
to, raise four kids. So Greg would often go and take pictures of these weddings and things too. Yeah.
At the time, that probably was kind of a lucrative thing, or could have been a lucrative hobby, if you would, to go with
Yeah.
somebody able to do that
And they
too.
all of the families in Greensboro wanted my father because he was the best at the candid shots because he was a press photographer.
Right.
So he was very much in demand for that as well. Yeah.
So
So
talk about then, we talk about him, but I think it's really exciting, and to see some of his stuff or who he is. And to your
yeah,
credit, you put together this magnificent website. I just love it. And
thank
if
you.
we can kind of maybe share the screen and talk a little bit about it, because I'll get a
Sure,
better feel
yeah.
of who your dad was.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So let me see if I can do this right.
Okay. And
Uh,
there she is. Great.
okay,
Okay.
great. So
So,
would
by the
you,
way,
oh,
let me
yeah,
just
go ahead.
jump right in. So, this is
Yeah,
first caught my attention immediately when she told me about this. This is
yeah,
the opening page of the
right.
website. And so,
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Well, this is probably my fa father's most famous image. What he's most known for was that he was the photographer, the only photographer to get photos of the what we call the Greensboro Four, the four A&T students who sat at the lunch counter, Woolworth lunch counter, on February
Wow.
1st, 1960, to protest segregation. This picture is a very famous picture. This and another one are in two Smithsonian museums, the Museum of American History and the African American History in DC, at least for the time being until someone decides to remove them. They've been there
And
for 40 years, yeah. But so this actually, it's a little bit of a misnomer that these four people here, the Greensboro Four, this was actually taken on the second day of the sit-in. The first day he could not get in, and so he had to get a picture of them coming down the street, which I can show you in a moment.
that's
But
great.
that's the only picture of the Greensboro Four. Now, this one was the second day, also a famous shot. I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but these two,
I did.
there's two of the Greensboro Four here, and then two other protesters the second day. So, and then this is a picture of my father.
Oh, let me just have you
Uh,
stop a second there.
oh yeah.
This quote, no, back to the picture of your dad. Just go down again, where you
Okay.
just
Yeah.
said, and just I'm reading this, and just I love that one quote. I think people can see it, but I can't believe I have a job where they give me all this film and send me up take pictures all day and pay me too, because every
Yeah.
amateur photographer talks about that. That you had to buy the film, you had to
Yeah.
process it unless he did
Right.
himself, and so that was a big part of the job that he had to
Yeah.
do all this, and he got paid to do it, so he liked it. Great photo. I
Yeah.
love it.
I think he just loved his job so like every day of his job, and he just said he wouldn't have done anything else, even though he didn't, get paid very much or whatever. But yeah, so he just and I think he was an extremely talented photographer who could have done anything like, National Geographic work or whatever, but he wanted to have a family. And what I like to say is that, he stayed in one place and the world came through because, like I say, the sit-ins, these were the first sit-in that precipitated all the other sit-ins throughout the South. These are very famous photos. And, also just things would, like in 1960, Nixon, and I can show you some of those if you'd
I'd like to
like.
see it. Yeah.
Yeah, so Nixon and Kennedy were stumping through. Let me go to that gallery. So all these there's a picture of Raymond Burr coming through. So Kennedy and Nixon, as you know, were campaigning against each other in 1960, and they would come through Greensboro. Here's Nixon, so the world basically came through. Johnson came through. This is Miss Kitty from, Gunsmoke in a local parade. Norman Vincent Peale,
Sure.
uh, if people know who that is, and Raymond Burr from Perry Mason. My father is so happy. My father's sister was also secretary to the vice president under Roosevelt, and then later Truman. And so she was able to get him into the Oval Office. So there's that picture of Winston Churchill and Truman. And then this was a very famous author of Death and Dying, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
Okay,
And
sure.
then and then some people would remember Frank Leahy. Um, so it was interesting. And then you've got these luminaries who would come through. Another thing my father just, and then there's the race relations. So I mentioned the sit-in images because those are the most famous, but Greensboro was also when they integrated Gillespie School, my father took a lot of pictures of integration, and actually those pictures were in Life magazine. This one in particular, I wrote an essay about recently, and this is a Ku Klux Klan or yelling at one of the boys coming in the school. This is the original four, Greensboro four walking down the street, as I mentioned. And if people go to the website, jackmoebes.com, there's actually a really interesting interview of my dad where he talks about a Ku Klux Klan member holding a knife to his throat when he was trying to get pictures of the integration of the schools, and also how he got the famous second day, shot. And then there were other, when they were trying to desegregate theaters. And then I just love a number of his images of, race relations and just, showing that we weren't all, you know, um, that there were some wonderful moments, of diversity and so forth.
Now, did you when he was shooting, did you ever go with him on any of the shoots, or did he ever take you?
I did some because my mother worked as a teacher, and so there were times when, I would have been home alone because I hadn't started school yet. And the one thing I remember is my father had this kind of jump back here to this picture, and you can see it. Oh, maybe that's forget where it is now. Oh, come on. Um, but he had, this is my favorite picture of him. This is sort of the quintessential press photographer. But he had this bag here, and back in the day, they had flash bulbs that went
Right.
into these cameras, right? And so I would have to put the flash bulbs in the bag. And then you also had to remove the magazine every time to change out the film, with those old cameras. And so I was kind of his helper, or whatever. So that was kind of fun. But and then I don't know, going back to the galleries, one thing that he loved were taking pictures of children. This is one of my favorite thing in animals. So it's just, to me, I think it would be of interest to people to go back and see, you know,
Beautiful. Yeah.
who we were from that time. I mean, this is an interesting picture because, this is probably around the early 60s or 50s even, and you've got, an integrated classroom there, and, the kids are all happy, and, this is one he probably set up, for George Washington's birthday or something. But I think it'll be of interest to people because it shows who we were during those 3 decades. And I think history is so important and for the future as well.
The
So
only thing that's missing though, Anne, in these, so far I'm not seeing any of you, you know.
right. So this website is really just for my dad's press photography
Right.
work. At some point, I may do something with family photos, but and then plus my father took a lot of photos of the South Pacific. And I was actually working on a documentary at one point. I went to the island in the South Pacific where he was, Espiritu Santo, and people may not know this, but James Michener was on that island because that was the big staging island, and it is the island that he based South Pacific on and Espirito Santo. And so I was able to get on the base, interview a World War II expert, had a, a photographer that, that helped me shoot that. And then I also went to a base in Hawaii, Kahuku Point, also, and interviewed a World War II expert there. So between that and these letters that my aunt, collected of my father's, she was at that time in the office of the vice president. And he was so sort of in the macro world, and he was in the micro world in the South Pacific. So I have all those letters and then the photographs. So eventually, we'll have probably a different website for the World War II photos and documentary. Hopefully, I'll put that documentary together as well.
Because you mentioned you were working on a project. This was a project you're working on and it kind of went on hold.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just taken a lot of time to put it together over these years because when you're working, you don't have time to do that. So probably in the last 5 years is when I put the most effort into it, and we created the website. And like I say, hopefully in the next few years, we're looking to do some exhibits, and so forth.
By the
So
way,
exhibits and books, hopefully.
going back to what you were starting to show me, so you showed me some lovely children pictures. Show me some of those animal pictures you started.
Yeah, those are so we call this section children and other
I
animals.
love it.
So, and somehow the newspaper sort of favored him for these things. Let's see, you wanted to see a few of
Animals. Yeah, some
the
animals.
animals. Like this is some hogs, and and this actually was in Boy's Life in Spanish, this one. It was of a this guy, I forget his name now, but he won a prize at the fair for best, hog or whatever. And it looks like the hog is smiling. Um, and then let's see if there's some other, this one I thought was kind of interesting. Yeah. Um, and then, there's actually, I wanted to point out as well, there's a section I call Life is Art. And my father, even though he's a press photographer, he really was very artful, maybe more than press photographers normally are. And so this is one of my favorites of this fireman. And then there's a kind of a famous one that I'm selling prints of now, and it's of a girl blowing a bubble. And I'm just kind of scrolling through these a little bit. Um, this one's he used to like to use infrared film Moebes. So this one right here is fairly famous, this photo. This is of a girl blowing a bubble with bubble gum.
Wow.
And see if I can stay on it because it wants to. But this was actually on the cover of a Warner Records band called Wilco. They had back in 1998, they had a album called Summer Teeth. And they were kind of a cult band, a cult, that's not the right word, but they had a specific following, and that became a very famous photo. So this image right here, we just came up with a limited edition version and an open edition of those. So those are actually can be purchased on the website.
How'd they choose that's I'm reading about it. I think I've heard the name American rock band in Chicago. Are they still around?
Yeah, they are.
That's what I
And they
thought.
have quite a following. And Wilco, people who are Wilco fans, they're just, so what happened was we had a deal with what was called Corbis, and it's no longer
I've
in
heard of it.
business.
Yeah.
But they were purchased by the Visual China Group in 2016, and then they're contracting. Getty Images is now their contracting arm, and I decided not to continue the deal when that purchase happened. But for 20 years, we had a deal with Corbis. So the Summer Teeth album came out of that. They were licensed, and the story goes that Jeff Tweedy, the head of the band, saw it on the website, the Corbis website, and was like, "Wow, that's what we want on the," because he was kind of trying to do a, you know, what people would call, maybe not so flatteringly, bubblegum pop.
Right. Yeah.
So he found that image on the Corbis website. And he's like, that needs to go on this album. So yeah. And
That's a
it's
great
actually
photo.
one of their most famous album covers. Yeah.
So
So
they just found it like at random and they found it. What a perfect.
I guess so. Yeah, and yeah. So that's kind of a fun thing too. So that and the sit-in image are probably the most famous, of his images. Uh,
Did that make you become a Wilco fan?
did that make me a Wilco fan? Um, at the risk of, alienating that partnership, I would say that I'm not the biggest fan of their music, but it's, I mean, everybody loves them. So, I like jazz, so I didn't so
Wh-
much get into it,
When
but
your
yeah.
dad when your dad was taking these pictures or when he retired from press
Yeah.
photography, did he have
Yeah.
any plans to do anything with these pictures or what was his eventual goal?
He did. He really desperately wanted to. And the problem was he was just beset with all kinds of physical problems. He had lung cancer at one point. I had to have a quintuple bypass surgery. So he did have a couple of exhibitions, but he really just didn't have the energy to, do it. And what he wanted to do, books and all kinds of things. So that's where I'm kind of trying to pick up the mantle and, mainly preserve this history. Because interestingly, and this was true across, as I learned, doing a lot of research, this was true across all the board, in the US. A lot of these newspapers, these images would be in what they called the morgue.
Right.
And the
Yeah.
reason they called it the morgue was it meant dead news because, back in that day, they didn't think about monetizing photos or anything. And so the newspaper was good for wrapping your fish the next day,
Right.
So basically, a lot of these newspapers just destroyed them. They just threw them away. And my father was one of the few photographers on the Greensboro News and Record who saved all his negatives in his office. And then when he retired, they said, you can have them if you want them. It seems kind of crazy these days,
I was going
right?
to say, right.
So we later kind of just, clarified the rights and so forth. So, we own the copyrights. Yeah, I should say I do because I'm the only living relative now. But yeah, so that was kind of interesting. So to be able to preserve, so for Greensboro history, in a way, this is it. My dad's photos, he covered 30 years of Greensboro history, and like I say, so many of the images had national interest. He covered a lot of the polio epidemic too, and some of those major events.
Is
So
there a Greensboro? I assume there's a Greensboro museum of some sort.
well, the sit-in images are actually in the this famous one of the four of them. That's only one of the four coming down the street. That is a floor to ceiling image in the International Civil Rights Museum and Center in Greensboro, which is on the site of I'm trying to find it again, is on the site of the sit-in. So this image right here, there's a floor to ceiling, image of that. So, and that is a wonderful museum in Greensboro. It goes into, a lot of civil rights history, not just the sit-ins, but yeah. And they preserve that, the lunch counter and everything there. I highly recommend people, go see that museum.
So let me ask you, Ann, back to what we've been looking at, first of all.
Yeah.
In terms of the website itself, if somebody wants to look at it, and I strongly recommend that they do, what's the website?
So it's jackmoebes.com. So that's JACKMOEBES.com.
Okay. And so if they go there, they can take a look at some of the stuff we've been looking at, right? I mean,
Right. And when they first arrive there, you didn't see it here, but when they first arrive there, there'll be a pop-up screen where they can sign up for the newsletter if they want. I don't send out a lot of, it's not like I'm sending things out every day or anything. In fact, kind of rarely. But if there's going to be an exhibition or a sale of certain prints release, then, they can sign up for news of that.
Well, just
So, and just they might just find the website itself interesting to kind of tool around in, but
you just mentioned something kind of interesting also, so that you have a shop option there as well. But if somebody sees something on this website, they'd like to get a picture of it, they can contact you, or they could get.
yes. Yes, and I can make prints, on demand. And also, I do a lot of licensing of particularly the sit-in images. So we license those to, organization. Like I just I've done a couple of licenses for the Smithsonian. I've, so probably every week I'm getting some sort of request to use the sit-in images in a documentary or, a book or something like that.
I
So
guess,
those are the most licensed, but I'm hoping that people will see some of these other, integration of the schools and, that kind of thing, polio epidemic and that kind of thing.
and I guess your dad would be proud of you in the sense that that's where the legal training came in, so that helping in terms of spreading the word or licensing or getting other
Yeah,
people to do
that
it.
really helps because from very early on when I was first barred, got my my law license back in, 85. That's when I began helping my dad. I did the whole deal with Corbis, and we had to do some deals with the newspaper to kind of just confirm the rights, and so forth. And I was very involved in helping him in the early days. And at least, he wasn't able to do all the things he wanted, but we did have that deal with Corbis for many years. So they licensed a lot, a lot of his images. I think they accepted about 260 of his images to license. So some of the ones that got licensed quite a bit were, for example, that image of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who wrote Death and Dying, some things that you wouldn't necessarily have thought.
So, moving forward, and at this point in time,
Yeah,
best bet in terms of finding out more about this is go to the website, which you mentioned,
yeah.
jackmobies.com, and also just what you're doing with us, which is fascinating. Just browse around in that. There's a lot of fascinating stuff, beautiful stuff. And like I said, it's
Yeah.
all low, but it's all black and white, though. Is that correct?
It's all black and white on this website. Yeah, I really don't have much in terms of, color on, other color of his, but it's for people who are aficionados of black and white. And one thing I wanted to point out here, I have a gallery called Comedy and Tragedy, because I think my father was very good at seeing irony in things. And for example, here's an image of a car that actually drove through a drive-in restaurant. He told the story about how all the other photographers kind of covered the bloody morass, but he happened to notice that it was actually a drive-in that he drove through. This is a man who unfortunately died in a cave-in. This is like a malfunction of a majorette's dress. Um, just things like this, something that looks like a football player lost his head. But he loved that kind of irony. There's one in particular. Here's a man sitting on top of a Christian Science reading room, a construction worker. And this, unfortunately, is a man who lost everything, in a fire, and he's holding this little cigar box with, presumably his only possessions, which is kind of sad. But those are the kinds of things, here's the mule coming out of a car and the kids are all into it. Snowball fight, And this one I love is he caught this man who was bald, sort of wistfully looking at women's wigs in a store window. But he would sometimes, he had assignments, to go to, but then when he didn't have an assignment, his job was just to tool around and get pictures, which is why he just so loved, his job, So I hope people will, be interested in that very important piece of 20th century photography and aficionados of black and white
Well,
too.
like I said, just me, just appreciating that the photo is so cool. And so if anybody's watching this or listening to it, definitely get to that website. I think you'll be impressed. And I guess lastly, when they go to the website and you said there's a way to get more information that you can get in touch with them in the future.
Yeah, so and just on the end of this, I'm putting up some portraits too that he did of people. Yeah, they can when they first come to the website, there should be a pop-up that allows them to put in their email address to be able to get email blast, newsletter, which will, talk about any news like exhibitions or, releases of print sales or whatever. They can also go to the contact um, portion. Let's see if I can get to it here. Um, so they can also do it that way. And you can subscribe down here to the news.
Okay. Well,
So
anyway, Ann,
mm,
I'd like to thank you again for being a guest on this edition of Blaine's World
thank
podcast.
you so much.
I'd also like to thank my producer, Kim Jones, and hopefully we'll stay in touch either through this
I hope.
fantastic dad of yours, very talented dad, or I'll
And I
get,
was so interested to learn that your father was into photography too. So I'd like to see some of his stuff.
right. No, it's just it's so interesting because again, you grew up in it, I grew up on it a little bit, but he just did that as a side thing, but he had a real talent for it. And
Yeah.
obviously your dad did too. So after he retired, what did he do?
Well, I mean, he did work a lot on, going through his negatives and kind of putting notes on them and annotations and things like that. He did do a lot of that. And like I say, unfortunately, he had a lot of medical issues, but so yeah, but he tried that. I would say most of his time was spent on that. And then he and my mother would sometimes go, travel with some of these like, Road Scholar and stuff like they like to do those. But yeah,
Okay. Anyway, Ann Moebes, I'd like to thank you again for being my guest, and I'm sure we will be in touch in the future. That'd be great.
sounds good. Thank you so much, Blaine. I really appreciate it.
Okay, well, this is always fun, and I'm going to stop recording, but then stay with me in just a second. Okay?
Okay.
Great.
Okay.
Speak to you soon.